So I don't know if anybody has tuned in yet, but if you have, you may want to have a blanket if you don't have a yoga mat. If you have a yoga mat, you still might want a blanket for the part at the end when we're on the mats more. You might want a towel to kind of roll up to put underneath your knees when we're laying down on backs, especially if your lower back bothers you at all. And if you have a sleep mask or an eye pillow, you might want that at the end, but that's really completely up to you if you like that whenever you're laying down. Sometimes it provides a little gentle pressure to the eye and helps with relaxation. So as I mentioned, I have not done this before. I have only videotaped for classes, not for yoga. So we're going to see how it goes, and we're just going to kind of muddle through it with each other. I can't promise that there won't be cats running through or a dog running through or people talking to me. So we'll just see how it goes. We're in uncharted waters all over the place, so might as well have another one. So we're going to just start in a really easy seat. So I'm going to move back a little bit more so that you can have more of the view, but I'm hoping that you'll still be able to see and hear just fine. So you can start either in an easy cross-legged seat, or you can start with your legs in Baddha Konasana. So easy cross-legged seat would be basically just kind of like, crisscross applesauce, like you probably did when you were in elementary school. For Baddha Konasana, you would want to bring your feet together in front of you and let your knees open out to the side. So I'm not really sure you can see this. If I tilt the camera down much more, you won't be able to see when we're standing. So it's kind of trying to hit the middle part. But you just bring your feet together, let them press against one another, and let your knees open really softly to the outside. So let me just quickly check this message, make sure somebody didn't say they couldn't hear or see. Okay, I think we're good. So take that comfortable seat, whatever that looks like for you, and just begin to kind of center in. You might close your eyes. You don't have to. See if you can let your mind relax a little bit. You don't have to try to turn it off. It's your mind's job to think, so it's silly to think that we could just stop that. But maybe you try to get it to focus on where you are right now. And if other thoughts come up in your mind, you see if you can notice them, acknowledge them. Oh, look, there's a thought about work. And then see if you can kind of let that go and bring your focus back to what it feels like to be in your body right now. I've been thinking a lot over the last few days about where we are and all the things that are going on and what we can do in our yoga practices or in how we breathe or just in how we get through our days to make this a little bit more bearable, make the uncertainty feel less scary. And as many of you know, I really am fond of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Buddhist monk. And at some point in talking about pain, he talked about finding a way to sit with the pain that we feel or the bad feelings that we have and breathe with them. And he says, this is an art. We have to learn it because most of us don't like to be with our pain. We're afraid of being overwhelmed by the pain, so we always seek to turn away from it. There's loneliness, fear, anger, and despair in us. Mostly we try to cover it up by consuming. There are those of us who go and look for something to eat. Others turn on the television. In fact, many people do both at the same time. And even if the TV program isn't interesting at all, we don't have the courage to turn it off, because if we turn it off, we have to go back to ourselves and encounter the pain inside. The marketplace provides us with many items to help us in our effort to avoid the suffering inside. And I know that in the past week or so, I have found myself online shopping more than once, I think, as a way to keep from thinking about what's going on. So he recommends this mantra. Breathing in, I'm aware of the painful feeling in me. Breathing out, I'm aware of the painful feeling in me. And if what you're feeling isn't pain, but fear or uncertainty, you can certainly substitute that. So breathing in, maybe saying that mantra. Breathing in, I'm aware of the painful feeling. Breathing out, I'm aware of the painful feeling. Breathing in, I'm aware of the feeling of fear. Breathing out, I'm aware of the feeling of fear. Continue that just for another moment or two. And then from here, you can let your eyes kind of flutter open if they're closed. Be slow and gentle about that and about all of this. And we'll start to move the body, and we'll try to do that in ways that are pretty calm and easy and not too stressful at first. And then we'll move into moving a little bit quicker, but we're not going to get particularly feisty in the practice today. So to begin, just lift your shoulders up by your ears. And then on an exhale, roll them back and down. And I don't know if you could hear my shoulders cracking, but I certainly could. Maybe yours did. On an inhale, lift up, and exhale back and down. Inhale one more time up. Exhale back and down. Now hold that pose with the shoulders back and down. And you might even feel like you could hold a pencil or your cell phone in between your shoulder blades, creating a little valley there. We don't often stand with our shoulders back and down like this or sit. I tend to kind of hunch over. And that's not good for us for a lot of reasons. It's hard on your back, it's hard on your neck, but it's also hard because it doesn't leave as much space for your diaphragm to expand, for you to get really good breaths. So the more that we can kind of practice this, pulling the shoulders back and down, pulling the neck back a little bit, tucking the chin a little bit, the more space we allow for the breath. On the next inhale, sit nice and tall. On an exhale, let your head go over to your left. Inhale there, exhale, let it roll back. Inhale there, exhale, roll to the right. Inhale, exhale, let it come forward. Let's do that one more time. To the right. And I've already gotten screwed up on my directions, so it's probably going to be inevitable. I will endeavor to do directions that are the opposite of what I'm doing because that's what you're seeing, but you're just going to have to work with me on it. Okay. So now that we've kind of loosened up the neck and the shoulders a little bit, we're going to roll forward over the knees. Let me adjust this. I'm going to have to find a different way to do this camera. I'm going to do this more than once. So roll forward over the knees. We're going to come into a tabletop pose. So just coming on to hands and knees. Let your hands be directly underneath your shoulders. Let your knees be directly under your hips. Let your arms Be nice and firm, but at the same time, take a look down at your elbow creases and kind of let them rotate a little bit more toward the front of your mat. They might be pointed kind of in the same direction as your index finger. See if you can create a long line of energy from your tailbone through your head. So if your head is drooping down, let it lift up a little bit. You don't need to try to completely flatten your back out. It's okay to leave some of that natural back curve, but we want to tighten the core just a little bit so that it pulls it up a tad. On your next inhale, you're going to let your tailbone lift, let your head lift, creating a cow back. And on an exhale, we're going to tuck the tailbone, drop the head, coming into a scary cat. Inhale, tailbone up, head up. And exhale, tailbone down, head down. And continue that just for a couple of breaths at your own pace. Inhaling and letting the tailbone and the head lift, letting the belly sink down. And exhale, pulling tailbone and crown of the head toward one another and letting the middle of the body lift up. Do that kind of slowly as you go with your breath. Let the breath lead the pose. And you may notice that over time your head sinks a little bit lower and your tailbone a little lower and your back arches a little more. And when you move the other direction, the middle of your body sinks a little bit more. Repeat that 2 more times and then come to just that flat, hands and knees, kind of flat back tabletop. So we'll move here from tabletop into a first twist of the whole body. So you're in your tabletop. You're going to lift your right arm up. And if your gaze can follow your hand, let it. And then on an exhale, you're going to dive that right hand in between the left hand and shoulder and come down on your shoulder. Kind of staying there in this twist. So your shoulder can be down on the mat, your right shoulder. You might, in this pose, let the left arm lift up to the sky, but you might not. I have a rotator cuff tear. That feels awful to me. If it feels awful to you, if anything I say feels awful to you, you shouldn't do it. Why would you do that? Anything that feels painful, don't do. If it feels like a little work or it feels like it's stretching your muscles, that's great. But if it feels like pain, you should stop. On your next inhale, pressing into the left hand, let that right hand lift back up to the sky, and then exhale it back to the mat. Kind of set your tabletop pose. And then on the next inhale, let the left hand lift up toward the sky, and my left won't, so maybe yours can. And on an exhale, let it go in between the right hand and the right knee, coming down on that left shoulder. Again, you can stay exactly here, or on an inhale, you can let the right arm lift up toward the sky. Taking a few breaths in that position. Trying as much as you can not to kind of crunch up even as you're in this twist. On the next inhale, press into that right hand and let the left arm come all the way up to the sky. And then exhale back down into that tabletop position. So we're going to come into a child's pose next. If you haven't done child's pose before, it's basically you're going to want to come to that tabletop position, knees about hips width apart, and then you're going to sink your tailbone back to your heels, or as close to your heels as it gets. And let your upper body just drape down over your knees. For some of us, the forehead might touch the ground. For some of us, it won't, and that's okay. Wherever you are in that pose, see if you can feel the sensation of your chest rising and falling and maybe pressing against your thighs. Child's pose is a wonderful pose to help you return your attention to your breath. So if at any point while we're practicing, I suggest something that you think is just not a good idea in your body or you don't really want to do, you can always come into child's pose. Take a few breaths. Take all the breaths. Take 2 more inhales like that. And then we're going to begin to transition to a standing position. So if you are on a slippery surface, you should definitely remove socks. If you were on top of a blanket or a towel on a slippery floor, you should move away from that. I don't want anyone to fall. So yeah, let's just not do that falling. So we'll move back to that tabletop pose. Again, check where your hands are. You want them to be under your elbows, elbows under your shoulders, your knees underneath your hips, feet kind of straight back. And you're going to tuck your toes under. Bring your hips back toward your heels and then up, coming into downward facing dog. This is our first downward dog. So in some bodies, it feels good to pedal out the heels. In some bodies, downward dog just feels awful. If downward dog feels awful, don't do it. You can stay in tabletop. It's okay. If your shoulders are feeling okay, then you want to press really firmly into the space in between your thumb and index finger. On your next exhale, start to walk your feet forward, just gently taking baby steps toward your hands. And then we'll come into a really soft forward fold. So just letting your body bend forward, letting gravity kind of do the work here. Your knees might be bent, mine are. They might be straight, also cool. But you don't want it to be particularly stressful. Maybe you cross your arms. Maybe you let your hands rest on the floor. If this feels awful or makes you feel lightheaded, or you know you have issues with pressure in the eyes or uncontrolled high blood pressure, you probably don't want to stay here. On the next inhale, we're going to start to come up very slowly. So letting the vertebrae straighten out one at a time. Really taking it easy. And eventually, you'll come all the way up to a standing position. Once you're in a standing position, you're going to want to get your feet in some kind of formation that feels okay to you. So a really traditional standard yoga pose is toes together, heels a little bit apart, tailbone tucked underneath. There's Astrid walking through, the cat. If that doesn't feel good to you, you can bring your feet a little bit more apart, maybe hips width apart, but still keep the toes in a little bit more than the heels. Just like we did earlier, let your shoulders come back, up, back and down. And on your next inhale, we'll bring the arms all the way up, Urdhva Hastasana. Exhale, Swan Dive forward, Uttanasana. Inhale, you'll come halfway up. Your hands might be on your shins or might be on your thighs. Exhale, fold forward. And then inhale all the way back up. And exhale, hands to heart and down to Tadasana. Let's do that 2 more times. Inhale, Urdhva Hastasana, hands up. Exhale, swan dive to Uttanasana. Inhale, halfway up, Ardha Uttanasana. Exhale, fold, Uttanasana. Inhale, sweeping the arms back up, Urdhva Hastasana. And exhale, hands down, Tadasana. One last time, inhale, up. Exhale, down. Inhale, halfway up, flat back. Exhale, fold. And inhale all the way back up. This is a very nice meditative flow. Hands back down. And let them come to your side. So if you're looking for a little bit of a yoga flow to do on your own, and you want to just kind of do it without needing to pay a lot of attention to what you're doing, that's a really nice, easy flow that you can do and still be sort of meditative in the moment. On the next inhale, we're going to sweep the arms back up. Exhale, fold forward. And we're going to plant the hands on the mat. So if that means you have to bend your knees a lot, that's okay, do that. And then we'll step the left foot back. And you're going to spin the left heel down so that the heel is pointing back toward the back right corner of your mat, and the toes are pointing up toward the top left corner of your mat. Get some nice weight into both the front foot and the back foot, and we're going to come up into Warrior One. Now, you may be able to just do this. You may want to kind of climb up the knee. So on an inhale, coming up into Warrior One, or climbing up the leg. You can also just stay here with your hands on your leg. Seeing if you can pull that right hip back and let that allow the left hip to come forward. Maybe you can sink a little bit more into that knee. And then on an exhale, we're going to bring the left arm back. Keep that right arm forward, coming into Warrior Two. Taking a couple of breaths here. If this is not possible, then straighten up that front leg. Regardless, on this next inhale, we'll straighten up the front leg. And on the exhale, lean as far forward as you can. And then let that right arm come down. Lifting the other hand to the sky. Coming into a triangle pose. And your triangle might involve your hand on your foot. It might involve your hand on your shin. It might involve your hand on your ankle. And as I noted, my shoulder is bothering me. So my arm right now is not particularly pointing toward the sky. Sometimes it works to let your hand just rest on your shoulder. On the next exhale, wherever your hand is, we're going to let that circle back around and surround the front foot. And then on an inhale, we'll just step the back foot forward to meet the front and fold. Inhale all the way back up. And exhale, hands come down to Tadasana. So we'll do the other side. I'm still having trouble figuring out rights and left for video. So whichever side you did, do the other one. On an inhale, arms lift up. Exhale, folding forward, Uttanasana. Inhale, looking up, and we'll step that other foot back. So my left, probably your right. And let the heel come down to the ground. The toes will point toward the front corner of the mat on the same side as that foot. And on the next inhale, hello dog. This is Indy, the dog. On the next inhale, we'll come back up into warrior one. Keeping that knee bent or not. Hands up or on the knee. Bringing that back hip forward and letting the front hip spin back so that as much as possible, the front of your body is facing forward. Breathing here for a few breaths. And then on the next exhale, we'll open this up to warrior two. When you're in warrior two, you're going to feel a sensation of your hips coming together behind you and also your shoulder blades coming together behind you. Breathing here. If you need to straighten up the front leg, you will. If it's bent, go ahead and straighten it now. And then begin to tilt forward, forward, forward. Come forward as much as you can before you come down. And then coming down into Trikonasana or triangle pose. Again, don't worry about where your hand is. It doesn't matter if it's on the floor or on your shin or on your thigh. Think more about opening up through the body. On the next inhale, you turn around so I can see you all. On the next inhale, go ahead and come back up. And then we're going to just step forward. Here we are again at the top of the mat. So we're going to work our way down to the floor. Yay. On an inhale, let your arms reach back up again. Exhale, fold forward, Uttanasana. Inhale, halfway up, Ardha Uttanasana. Exhale, let your hands come to the floor. Step both feet back, coming into downward dog. We'll stay here for about 5 breaths, since we only have a couple of downward dogs in this particular class. Thinking about where it's possible to let your chest come a little bit more toward your thighs. If your knees are bent, it's okay. If your heels aren't touching the ground, it's okay. These are not things we need to worry about. On the next exhale, just go ahead and drop to the knees. And then bring your hips off to one side and go ahead, swing the legs around. So let me just adjust the camera now, since we are going to be on the ground at this point. Okay, so now you should be in a seated position. We'll go ahead and lay back on your mat. Just reclining on your back, so nothing fancy. Let your knees come in. If possible, you're going to bring your knees to the point where your fingertips could touch the knees. This partly depends on how long your arms are, and we all have different length of arms. It partly depends on the degree to which your knees comfortably bend. So your heels may or may not be touchable with your fingertips, or they may be so close that you can actually cup the back of your heels. But bring them in where you can. Let your knees point straight up at the sky, so not pointed in, not pointed out, but just straight up. And let your arms come down flat behind you, beside you. Now, see if you can lift your back the slightest bit. It won't even come up all the way off the mat, and kind of wiggle your shoulder blades together. So at the beginning, I said to try to imagine holding a pencil or your cell phone in between your shoulder blades. So we'll do that again, but here on the ground. And then on the next inhale, you're going to press into those shoulder blades, press into the feet, and lift your hips coming into bridge pose. Now, your bridge may be way up off the ground. It may be like an inch. It's okay. Not only is it not a contest, but we can't even see each other. So your bridge can be whatever it is. Seeing if you can hold that bridge for 5 breaths. So those are your 5 breaths. So who am I to know how long your breaths are? As you're in the bridge, maybe with each breath, you can feel your chest reaching more toward your chin. You can feel your hips reaching more toward the sky. If your chin is like tucked way in, let it come back just a little bit. You don't want to be rolling onto the crown of your head, but let your neck have some space. And on the next exhale, just let the hips come down. Bring your feet out to the side of your towel or your mat, or just 1.5 feet apart if you're not on a mat. And then let your knees come together. Just releasing a little bit of the lower back, because we're going to do one more of those. Reset the feet, back again, about hips width apart, and right underneath the hips. Check your spacing. Let your arms come to your sides. Tuck the shoulder blades if they're untucked. Maybe this time you want to make little robot arms, bending the arm at the elbow and making little fists, or little straight, choo-choo train hands. On the next inhale, press into the feet and the shoulder blades and let the hips lift. Let the chest reach up. I'm told that someday, you will be so good at this that the front of the chest will be totally vertical. And I believe that, but not today. Inhaling, don't hold your breath. Exhaling 5 of your very own breaths. And when you get to 5 breaths, go ahead and come back down to the mat, nice and slowly. Let your knees kind of drift from one side to the other a couple of times, making these little windshield wipers. And then go ahead and let your feet come long. We're going to do a very fancy yoga pose called pancake asana, where we literally just flip over like a pancake. So flip over. It's very fancy. We're going to do our final back bending pose, which is a yin pose. So we'll do Sphinx. For Sphinx, you're going to put your elbows directly below your shoulders. So you don't want them way back here. You don't want them way forward. Really right below the shoulders. Let your arm come straight forward and your hand will rest on the mat. So right now in my body, this is really uncomfortable on my shoulder. So I need to bring my hand in just a little bit. If you need to make that sort of adjustment, you should. Your legs should be straight out behind you, feet untucked. And we're going to stay here. We're going to stay here for about 3 minutes. So if you haven't done yin, the point of yin yoga is to allow gravity to help us relax the fascia of the body and allow for stretching of parts of the body that we don't normally allow to stretch, that become really stiff, hello Astrid, really stiff and non-elastic over time. So there is actually nothing for you to do here right now other than just be here. When I first started practicing yin, I found being in a yin pose for 3 to 5, we're not going to stay 5, we're going to stay 3 to 5 minutes was really a challenge for me because I had a hard time, as Thich Nhat Hanh said, sitting with the pain. So if something felt not really painful, it shouldn't feel painful, but if it felt uncomfortable, I wanted to pull away from it. And I wanted to pull away from it by either wiggling or thinking about things besides being in the yoga class. So it took a long time for me to get past that and to be okay being in yin poses. Right now, think about your glutes. Are you clenching them? I bet you are. So see if you can let go of that clenching. I'm going to say that again in like 1 minute because they tend to clench right back up. Are you holding on to all of the muscles in your chest? Can you let those go? So in a lot of ways, yin is really about letting go of holding on with our muscles. Just like getting past fear and anxiety is about often letting go of our need to control everything. So we only have about 45 seconds left. It goes fast. Take just 2 more breaths. Make them nice, big, long breaths. And exhale. Inhale and exhale. You can bring your hands together and let them overlap one another and let your elbows come out to the side and come down on either your forehead or one temple. And just rest here for a second. See if you can feel a little bit of sensation of energy kind of radiating out from the lower back when you've uncompressed what you were compressing in that pose. Now to release that a little bit more, we're going to lift the feet up to the sky and just do a little bit of windshield wiper motion back and forth. Aggressive timer. And let that come back down. Bring your hands down just about even with your chest. Tuck the toes a little bit just to provide some stability. Coming back up into tabletop. And then we'll just sink the feet back or the hips back onto the heels again into child's pose. Now this time I'm going to recommend that you bring your knees kind of wide. If you're using a mat, maybe about the width of the mat. If you're not using a mat, again, about 1.5 feet apart. And then coming down into child's pose from here. Your arms might be long in front of you. They might also come down next to you. And we'll stay here in child's pose again for about 3 minutes. If we do this again, I will have some music for the class. Today I was
not quite certain enough about the volume level and your ability to hear to add music on top of it. So here in child's pose, maybe as we stay in the pose, you feel your chest dropping a little bit more toward the ground. Maybe you feel your hips coming a little bit more toward your heels. If your hips are not on your heels, it's not a problem. If it becomes uncomfortable to stay in this position, then you don't have to do that. If your version of this is your hips are pretty far up, that is perfectly fine. If your knees really hurt like this, sometimes tucking your hand behind the knees and then coming back down provides just enough space in the back of the kneecap to make the difference that you need. Continuing to breathe here. Letting your breath support you. If you feel some challenge in breathing, let your focus be on that and on what that experience is. And see if you can kind of think some relaxation and some letting go into that breath. We've got only about 30 more seconds in this pose. So just relaxing there, as much as relaxing as possible. Taking one more good round of breath. And then on your next inhale, beginning to rise back up. And let your hips come off to one side and come back onto your derriere. So the next two poses that will come into, it's called shoelace pose. And I'm going to give you a couple of different options because it really in part depends on the situation in your knees and also in your hips. The pose isn't really about your knees, but sometimes people find it a little hard if they have knee issues. It's more about the hips. So we will start on this side. So I guess that would be your right knee bent. It is my left knee bent. Let the left leg go long, sitting up pretty straight. And then just take that right foot and hop it over the left. Okay, so this is kind of step option 1. 2, if this is available to you and you're good, then bring that foot back. And for some people, it's going to be back just a little. For some people, it's going to be pretty far back next to the hip. So this is option 2. You've got the foot back. The knee begins to come down toward the extended legs knee. Option 3, if this is all okay with you, is to then bend the long leg underneath, and then the knees kind of stack on top of one another. So that's 3 variations. Pick the one that works for you. If you are in this variation and you're not feeling very much, this feels kind of like just a way you would normally maybe sit, you can bring your feet out a little bit more, away from the body, and that will be more of a stretch in the hips. If you really want to do this and it's not really possible, sometimes lifting up on a pillow is good, but for today, I would say just stick with one of the other options if this isn't working for you. Another possibility, if you want a little bit more, is that you can lean forward over your knees. So for a lot of people, this pose, shoelace pose, sits in the hips and causes a lot of stretch. Sometimes it's more in the bottom legs hip, sometimes it's more in the top legs hip. For me, it's usually more in the top legs hip. So if you have a part of your body that's having strong sensation, try to not run away from that sensation. Try to not grip and move away from that sensation. Instead, try to breathe and imagine that you are breathing into that location. I know you can't really breathe into your hip, in case any science types are watching. I recognize you can't really breathe into your hip, but pretend that you're pulling the breath into that location, and that on an exhale, you're letting go of the tension. If we do this again together and it's yin, I will probably explain less and let you sit a little bit more with your own experiences and whatever music we have on. But since this was the first time, it seemed more wise to talk. So just another big round of breath here. And then after you exhale, go ahead and let the top leg go long, let the bottom leg go long. Maybe you wiggle your legs a little bit and let that out. Maybe you take your hands and make little kind of tiger claws and surround your kneecaps and just kind of rotate them around clockwise and then counterclockwise if that was bothersome in your hips. And then we will do exactly the same thing on the other side. So extend the opposite leg, so your right leg, I believe. You'll bring the left leg up, hop it over. Option 1, option 2, option 3. Don't feel like you have to do the same thing on both sides. It's possible that on one side it was okay to have the bottom leg bent, and on the second side it's not okay to have the bottom leg bent. And that's fine. Do what feels right on this side in this moment. We've got the timer set again on this side. We'll stay here for 3 minutes. Breathing into any of those areas where you're feeling strong sensation. So on this side for me, that's my left hip. Trying to breathe into that and allowing that breath to relax the muscles so that I can get the stretch into the fascia. If the muscles are gripping, you're not really ever going to get to that fascia stretch. You're only working the muscles. So we want to let that go in yin. That's muscle work is not really the goal. I think the first yin class I ever did, I spent the entire class thinking, well, this is awful. I don't know why I'm doing this. This seems really uncomfortable. And then by the end of the class, when it was all done, I felt so calm and good, that then it was pretty clear I needed to do it again. If you've never live videoed yourself on Facebook, which I hadn't until today, it's a little disconcerting because you can see if someone types a message, but if you're this far away, you can't at all see what the message is. So it'll be interesting to see them later. And I hope that they don't say that nobody can hear me. Just a few more rounds of breath here. And on your exhale, beginning to let that go. Let the top leg go long. Let the bottom leg go long. Maybe a little wiggle. Maybe a little tiger claw of the kneecaps. Maybe a little rotation of the feet. Okay, we're going to move into a forward fold that in Yin we call caterpillar. I mentioned when we were doing setup, or when I was doing setup ideas on Facebook, that you might want to have a pillow or a bolster if you have a bolster, and that you might also want to have a blanket. So in this pose, either one of those might make sense to use. So with caterpillar, your legs are going to be straight. You can place a pillow. Hopefully your pillow is not covered in cat hair, because mine clearly is. You can place a pillow on top of your thighs, or you can place a rolled up blanket on top of your thighs, or you can place a pillow and a rolled up blanket on top of your thighs. It's really up to you, or nothing. You don't have to put anything there. And all this pose consists of is legs straight and folding forward. So often in yoga, when we're doing forward folds, we say to keep the back straight. But in Yin, that is not really as often what we're doing. So here you can let your back curve. Maybe your head comes down onto the pillow. Your chin comes down onto the pillow. If you're really flexible, maybe your head comes down onto your knees or your shins. If you're like incredibly flexible, maybe your head would come down in between kind of your ankles. And again, breathing into areas of tension. So for many people in this pose, the tension is going to be in the lower back. And that might be the area that needs a little extra breath. Or it's going to be in the back of the knees. And that might be the area that needs a little extra breath. If your knees start to feel really not happy with the legs extended and this forward pressure on them, try taking your fisted hands and putting them just behind the knees. And that just supports enough of a bend that sometimes it relieves pressure that can be a little painful for some people. And our goal here is to stretch the fascia that goes along the back of your body, which actually goes, all the way, if you think about it, from your heels up the back of your legs, over the derriere, up your back, and then up the neck, wrapping up the head. So sometimes this is why we can get head pain or headache when our lower backs hurt, is that everything is so interconnected. So we're trying to allow all of that to stretch with this forward fold. And for a lot of us, the back of the legs are not very stretchy. So it can be a little bit of a challenge. Just 3 more rounds of breath here. And on your next inhale, beginning to rise back up. And you can take your pillow or your blanket and set those off to the side. You might want the blanket again, but you probably won't want the bolster or pillow again. And we'll come back onto the back again. So nothing fancy, just again coming back onto your back. And we'll end our yin poses before we go into shavasana with some nice, really mellow twists. So if it's possible for you, you're going to bring your arms out to a T. If you don't have the space for that, or if this is more comfortable, you can also do goalpost arms. So, like a goalpost. I don't really have another simile for that. And then let your knees come forward, come into your chest. You might even give them a little hug to really feel them firmly come in, just for a second. And then on an exhale, we're going to let the knees go over toward your right side. And I'm going to bring them toward the camera side so that you can see. So you're going to let your knees come over to your right side, keeping them as close as possible to your armpit. And then your left shoulder, you want to see if you can relax it toward the floor. So not to the floor necessarily, just toward the floor. You can look toward your knees if that is what is comfortable and available for your neck. You can look toward the ceiling if that is comfortable and available. You can look toward the cats running through the room, or you can look over your left shoulder toward your left hand if that is available to you, which is a little bit more of a twist. Again, here, just seeing if you can give your body a scan. See if you're clenching the muscles in your back. And if you are, see if you can let that go. See if you're clenching the muscles in your lower back. And if you are, see if you can let that go. Now thinking about the muscles in your legs, are you clenching there? And if you are, can you let those go on an exhale? A lot of people don't find this pose particularly uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean that no one does. So if you do, is it a discomfort that you can breathe into? If it's not a discomfort that you can breathe into, then think about what you can do to make it better for you. Maybe that's moving the top leg down a little. Maybe that's bringing the left arm over to a more comfortable position for you. Just about 5 more breaths in this position. And on your next inhale, you can lift the legs back to center. Take a round of breath here. and then let them come toward the other armpit. And again, you can look toward that side, so looking toward the knees. You can look up toward your ceiling. You can look toward the opposite hand. Thinking about letting the shoulder come toward the mat on both sides. So for me, on the other side, I can let the shoulder reach the mat. For me right now, on this side, I can't. And that's just where my body is. So meet your body where it is. I think yin practice is such a good yoga practice to do at home because it's not complicated. It's easy to figure out just by looking at what the poses are and thinking through them. It's not a challenge to do once you've learned the poses in terms of complexity. And it's really about letting go. And in times like this, when we're feeling a good amount of uncertainty and maybe anxiety, maybe fear, probably any practice that helps us kind of let go of anything is a good idea. Just kind of sitting with those feelings of tension and those feelings of discomfort, breathing into them and seeing if we can let them go even just a little bit. And just about 3 more breaths on this side. And on your next inhale, let your knees come back up toward your ceiling. Coming out of the twist. Maybe give the knees a nice little hug. If you feel like your yoga practice is not complete unless you do a happy baby, or you feel like you need a headstand, then you can certainly do that here. Otherwise, we will come directly into Shavasana. So Shavasana is our pose of final rest. You will let your legs go long. So scooch the way that you need to scooch in order to make that happen. Let your heels be about a mat's width or about, again, 1.5 feet apart. Letting the toes just kind of splay out to the side. Your arms will come down next to your side with palms facing up. With your face up toward the ceiling. If you are having discomfort when you lay on your back, especially in the lower back, this is a good point to grab that blanket and you can roll it a little. You don't want it too tall, but roll it a little bit and tuck it behind your knees as you're laying down. That will provide some comfort. You can throw a blanket or your pillow over your hips. Sometimes that's a nice grounding tool. If you brought your rice pillow or your eye mask, putting that on your eyes here is a good way to help release the eyeballs, kind of let them go back into the eye. So here in Shavasana, there's nothing for you to do. Just being here. Begin to breathe a little bit deeper. Let that breath begin to bring some energy back to your body. Beginning to wiggle fingers and toes. Letting that movement gradually move up into the wrists. Maybe you circle your wrists, your ankles. And eventually, maybe you take a big stretch like you just got up in the morning. Letting your whole body stretch out. And then on your next exhale, bring your knees up so that your feet rest on the ground. Taking a breath or two there. And then just gently rolling off onto your right side. Pausing there to thank yourself for taking an hour and change out of your day to do a yoga practice. Press into your left hand and let that bring you back up to seated. Maybe you come back into an easy cross-legged pose like at the beginning, or maybe you do a more of a Baddha Konasana like at the beginning with your feet together and your knees wide. Taking just a second to reflect back on the beginning theme or idea of letting go of painful sensations, but also sitting with them, acknowledging them instead of running away from them. The difference between letting it go and running away from it is if you're running away from it, you're not really doing anything to acknowledge it. You're not really setting it free. You're just moving away. So whatever we can do to sit with how we feel in this really uncertain and confusing time, and then let go of our need to control it, will probably be to our benefit. Thank you for hanging out with me virtually for this yoga class, and please give me some feedback because I have no idea what any of this looked like on the live stream. I'll be reviewing it and trying to make some adjustments before I do it again so that it's an even better experience the next time around. Thank you all very much. Bye.